Okay, so welcome, bonjour, Annie, to everybody who is here for this amazing final session of our Ecom 2021 conference this afternoon. Just so you know that we are recording this session. If you do not want to have your camera on for that, then you might want to turn it off at this point, just for your information as well. So as we said, this is our final session, and we were just having a little chat about how smoothly everything has gone. So I just want to take this opportunity to publicly acknowledge Hillary's work that she has done in the conference. It's as a co-chair of this amazing conference, I wanted to put that little plug in while I had an opportunity to. So our session this afternoon is with two amazing Toronto School Board teachers, and it's nurturing local water education. So hopefully you are in the session that you are planning on being on this afternoon. That is their session. So I'm just going to start with the land acknowledgement. And I know for many of you, if you've been presenting or if you've been attending a lot of the sessions, you have heard this land acknowledgement at several of the sessions, but we feel that it's important to always recognize the communities where we are located in. You know, if you want to put it in the chat box what community you're in, that would be wonderful, so that we can get a sense of where people are coming from. I know that we've had people from all across Canada and from other countries as well. But here, where the conference is located, is in Toronto. So we will use a land acknowledgement that goes with that, that territory. So we acknowledge the traditional territory upon which the conference is being hosted for many thousands of years: the Huron-Wendat and the Petun First Nations, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit, have sought to walk gently on this land. This territory is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands and resources around the Great Lakes. This acknowledgement signals our desire to seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one based on honor and deep respect, and it is a starting point to remind all of us to enact this work in our personal and professional lives. So thank you for that land acknowledgement as well through the Ecom committee. And this session is talking about one of those really important elements. So at this point, I sort of half introduced Hillary, who's going to be the host for our session. I'm Sheila Rhodes. I've been involved a little bit in this conference with the planning of the program. And I'd like to now introduce our two speakers. So we have Gigi Shanks, that I've had the pleasure of knowing for quite a few years. And Gigi is an educator of 14 years, is an environmental education specialist and a member of the OISE Action Research Team. She integrates science, research, and visual arts to teach from a systems perspective in a middle school STEAM program. She has co-taught PJ, AQ, science, and TDSB workshops. And our second presenter is Adrienne Rigler. And Adrienne is a teacher researcher at Ryerson Community School, a TDSB K-6 school in Toronto, who currently learns alongside a class of grade 6 students. She has been researching effective practices of water education in her classroom for the past 6 years, working with university researchers in Canada and China. So I'd like to welcome the two presenters, and we will have the chat box open, and Hillary and I will be monitoring it during the session if you've got any questions. And I know these two presenters will be more than happy to answer questions at the end of the session. So I'm going to turn it over to our two presenters. Oh, Hillary, did you want to mention the action research?
I just wanted to say that I've had the pleasure of not only working alongside these two teachers for many years, but also canoeing alongside them the last few summers, which has been just as pleasurable as working alongside them. They're also both members of the TDSB, Toronto District School Board, and OISE Action Research Team of teacher researchers, and they have been doing wonderful work as part of that. So I'm really pleased to be in this session with them today. Thanks, Adrienne, and thanks, Gigi.
So just as I'm switching over, I will close my video. I tend to have audio problems for everybody if I leave it on. So I will do that now. And then video's off and mute's on. Okay, perfect.
Ani buju Sararakandishtakas Shebananing and Donjaba Takaranto and Day. Takaranto, a Mohawk word, the place in the water where the trees are standing, the place where the fish weirs are. My dog and I spend a lot of time walking. It's my favorite way to move through this city. For me, it's a meditative action that isn't about negotiating bike lanes or public transit, but a time to slow down and really try to see the world around me. Concrete sidewalks, parking lots, now covering the rivers and trails that once flowed freely. The Petun, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Métis, the Mississaugas all made their homes here, and many other nations expanding beyond these groups traveled through for commerce and trade for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I think of the other First Peoples' languages and the names they had for this place. I think of the ancient trails covered by the pressures of settlement. The waterways and the moderate climate of the Great Lakes made it a perfect place to fish, hunt, grow food, gather medicines and seeds for horticultural development. Rich, fertile, and abundant, Turtle Islands, Mesopotamia. Many First Peoples and their goods traveled from here all the way to the Mississippi and back. Whenever I travel somewhere new, I try to find out whose land I'm on, and I ask, who are the original occupants here? So for Indigenous peoples, land acknowledgements are not only to assert our sovereignty and treaty rights of today, but it's also a way for all peoples to feel more connected to a place. Davenport might be a street now, one I walk down regularly in my neighborhood, but it's not just another thoroughfare. For me, it's an ancient portage trail that holds Indigenous knowledge. They say the animals made the first trails that led them to water, and the people followed. I imagine the deer and the moose once made this trail, followed by the people carrying their birch bark canoes, carrying their goods to trade and bringing stories to tell. Nations from all over Turtle Island met and traveled through this land. Many languages were spoken. Alliances and decisions were made. People from different nations met and intermarried. The dish with one spoon treaty was made. Takaranto was a meeting place and land made up of sophisticated and cosmopolitan peoples and cultures that I see reflected in the city today. I wonder, is it something in the land and the water? Land acknowledgements might seem like a small and simple gesture, but like many of our ways, they are intended to have more impact and hold more meaning than the words alone. If we pride ourselves on diversity and equality, shouldn't our story include Indigenous peoples? In this era of reconciliation, we need to share the truth first. And reimagine the narrative of this land and this city together.
Yeah, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Adrienne Rigler. As mentioned before, I'm a teacher at the TDSB. I've been teaching for 23 years in an inner city school in the heart of Toronto. Our presentation today is called Nurturing Local Water Education. Again, if you have any questions in the chat or you would like to introduce yourself, please use the chat function at any time to ask questions and to stop and ask for clarification. I'm going to begin the presentation this afternoon with an activity that I would share with my students called The Story of the Watershed. And the purpose of the activity is to help to build connections between the students and the local and current water issues in Toronto. Then Gigi will take over and share a photo essay and research on urban watershed and connecting geography and water systems. And we hope timing gives us a way to it. We want to have discussion and questions at the end. So we started with a video that I would use to help the students have an understanding of the First Nations Métis and Inuit relationship to water. Toronto is part of a very large watershed. The connection to the urban watershed is very easy for my students to overlook in the heart of downtown Toronto. Despite being only 2 kilometers from the lake, many students rarely get to the waterfront. For years, my students have traveled, I've taken my students to the Don River and Humber River to help them to connect their proximity to the rivers and the lake in their community. When I take students on these field trips, many of them have never traveled east of the Eaton Center, which is about 2 kilometers to the east of the school, or traveling westbound, they have not gone further than Dufferin Mall, which is 2 kilometers to the west. This is the beginning of the story, and it would help the children understand what our local watershed consists of. So the activity that I designed is based on a well-known activity called the Story of the River. And in the Story of the River, there's a large basin of water, and there are a number of different substances. And as the story is told, children come up and pick up their respective containers, and they add that contaminant to the water. The original story has a lot of contaminants that originate in more rural areas. So there are 3 different farmers that contribute different contaminants. There are different factories that produce 3 different factories that produce waste that end up in our watersheds. But the reality for my students is that that's not our surroundings. That's not our environment. And within our the urban environment around my school, the contaminants that are ending up in the lake are primarily from the local community. So my goal was really to design the story such that it's based on current data and research from Toronto. And on the right-hand side, you'll see an image that was created by Richard Prager, one of Hillary's students that worked in my class. And he summarized the Toronto Harbor Monitoring Report to show the students some of the contaminants that were present in Toronto Harborfront. And I used a lot of that information plus a number of other research sources to design this lesson. As I went through, this is just one part of a very large chart looking at all the references and resources. So within the story, there are different characters, and the ingredients are really the actors that you choose to represent that. So I actually used cat temptations. I had a choice of soil or cat temptations in the house and went with cat temptations to represent, for example, raw sewage. So just an idea of how I developed that lesson. Before I go on, I should just, when Gigi and I originally planned this, the goal was to have an interactive outdoor lesson. We would recreate this lesson outside with our participants, taking turns reading the information and adding the contaminants. I'm new to remote learning. I've been in the classroom all year, and I really struggled to try to figure out how to recreate this online. And what I have done is there is a short video, and then we'll read the next slide talking about the next contaminant. I won't go through every part of the lesson, but just to give you an idea of how the lesson will flow, I always start with a clean glass of tap water, in maybe not a beer stein in my classroom, but certainly a large glass of water. And I ask the students to start thinking about whether they would want to drink this water. All right. Oh, no. I managed to go really far. Yeah. No video. Thank you. So I've turned the mute off on all of these, so don't think there was no sound. So it's really, I want them to make that connection. The casserole dish represents our watershed and ultimately Lake Ontario. This is a sample of one of the cards. So the students would read small bathroom items. So the student that has been designated to be responsible for small bathroom items would come up. Small bathroom items such as dental floss, cotton swabs, condoms, feminine hygiene products are quickly disposed of in the toilet bowl that sits very conveniently beside the bathroom sink. These have been found in the lake. In a single sampling in 2018, over 900 items were found floating in the water in the Toronto waterfront. So I put a star beside condoms and feminine hygiene products. Depending on the grade level that you teach, you could add and subtract different things. So if I was teaching in a high school or a senior level class, I could talk about condoms. With my classroom, I wouldn't put the condoms in, but since I've already covered our puberty unit of feminine hygiene products, I would include that in the lesson. The cleaning industry has effectively marketed flushable wipes for their convenient disposal. These pre-moistened towelettes are ready for use and can disappear magically down the toilet. Not one brand of flushable wipes breaks down in water. They contribute to blockages in sewage pipes that can lead to overflow of sewage into the watershed. Many of these wipes contain plastic fibers that harm wildlife. I am using my slide because I end up going into an endless cycle of watching the same video again. So one of the things when I'm designing the lesson, I really like to look at and make sure that I'm bringing in things that directly connect to home. And I think we often think of contaminants as things that are maybe toxic to people or poisonous to fish, but just something simple such as cooking oils, even salad dressings, any greasy food waste and other food particles that will absorb those fats will contribute to or are considered a contaminant in our water treatment and sewage system. They tend to lead to blockages. We've reduced the major threat of fatbergs, which are huge blockages of fat in our wastewater pipe, by some bylaws that prevent restaurants and other organizations from flushing their oils down the drain. Talking about some microfibers. So one cozy fleece jacket can contribute 250,000 microfibers during a single wash. These particles are too small to be filtered in the water treatment plants, and clothing can contribute all clothing can contribute anywhere from 2,000 to 1,000,000 pieces of microfibers from a single item during one wash. And those all are our water system our treatment system is not designed to filter out particles that are that small. So these fibers end up in the lake. The other issue with those fibers is they often absorb toxins, and they also contain toxins such as flame retardants and synthetic dyes that are washed into the watershed. Again, road salt, very big issue, certainly in Toronto and in our schoolyards. And it's something that we see regularly during the winter months, the piles of salt in our schoolyard, and our salt containers often left open. So sometimes people in the community have taken some out and poured it around, and we end up with more salt. It takes a single teaspoon of salt to de-ice 1 block of sidewalk. And I've just used some gray salt, table salt. We have a lot of smokers in our school and a lot of people in our community, and our schoolyard is almost snow white at times with the butts of cigarettes. And again, we had a discussion with my students about this, and the issue came up. Some of the students self-identified their parents as culprits in terms of throwing out cigarette butts onto the ground. We had that discussion about how we don't want to get angry at people, but how we need to let them know, and people aren't aware necessarily that these chemicals are toxic to aquatic organisms and also end up in our lakes and streams as they're not removed through water treatment. And I'll skip that video. I will go to the video of the waste. This is always very effective if you're ever doing this activity and you have a cat. Temptations make very good sewage. Oh, stop this one. There was one I am searching through I've lost. I'm here. And I'm thinking of all of you wondering where I've gone. So there's one other slide I wanted to show you, and it looks at a new concern, a new contaminant of concern. And it is number 20. So really this idea of contaminants of emerging concern is important for us to think about, in that our treatment plants are responding to the past. You know, it's a bit like evolution. We're responding to pressures in nature, but pressures in the system. Our system is designed to handle things that have occurred in the past. But we've recently been finding that these contaminants of emerging concern exist and have been detected in our lakes, rivers, and streams. And they come into, they're a lot of pharmaceutical products. It can also include the fire retardants, but pharmaceuticals such as antibiotics, analgesics, and hormones enter the lake. And currently we have no way of removing them from our lakes, rivers, and streams. So they will be cycling through, and they're contaminants of emerging concern. And the research is just starting on looking at what are the impacts of these contaminants in our ecosystems, in our watershed. I only, when I'm creating the presentations and the materials, I try to use as many resources and materials that are recyclable or compostable. So most of the items are fairly harmless, and those were just a collection of some of my multivitamins that I use. And this is where I go back. This is where you get to see it all again. So one of the things we often talk about at the end of the lesson, I always want to draw them back to that idea, or the understanding that the lake water is where Toronto gets their drinking water. That is our source of drinking water. And, you know, although that water will go through a treatment plant to make it safe for us to drink, the organisms that live in the lake, so the fish, the turtles, Daphnia and other microorganisms, all of those organisms can't escape that, and they don't have the option of cleaning up the lake. So that becomes our responsibility. And, you know, it's really important when we're looking at water education and environmental education that we don't leave students with that vision of that horrible water as our source of drinking water and being in our environment. So my action with the students then is say, well, where do we go from here? What do we do with this information? How can we work on solving this problem? Students in my class come up with ideas for activities that will examine and look for solutions to managing the contaminants that we've discovered in the Harborfront report, but also in the other news articles and research that I've brought up. Just a couple of the things that they have done. So a couple of years ago, my students created the 3 Ps toilet tunnel. I'm going to play the video. Hopefully it works. I had a lot of problems and it seems to go. There is no audio, but yes. So in this activity, they created a toilet out of our guided reading table, and children had to climb down into the toilet, and they would pass through the Yellow River, I guess their urine, and then they would collect things out of the sewer pipes that were on their way to the watershed. We don't have it in the video, but in there on the actual day of the event, there was a plant tower at the end. So they were crawling towards this tower of water. And the children lined the sides of the table with syringes, and there was poop, there was urine drops. They had all sorts of different objects that were found, diapers that were found in the Toronto harbor. And the children, as they crawled through the tunnel, had to collect the things they thought didn't belong in the sewer in the sewer drains, and they would bring them out. And then there was a sorting activity when they were done, and they would look at, and many of the children said, oh, you shouldn't have poo in your sewer, you shouldn't have pee in your sewer. So there was a lot of education around what are the things that we can flush down. And the 3 things we can flush down, as we all know, are the, lots of giggles, but the pee, the poo, and the toilet paper. They also this year, not this year, but this World Water Day event, they tested beet juice. So they had an experiment going where children were able to test different materials as de-icers. And they had another activity where they were trying to clean microplastics from the water using different techniques. That's the end of my presentation for now. I'm going to pass it over to Gigi. I'm happy to take any questions now or at the end.
Just need to get the sharing going. Hope the technology works. All right, so I need to go to the beginning. It's always a good place to start. So this year I'm actually teaching in a virtual classroom, and I'm teaching grade 8s. So I think like all teachers, that dilemma of never having enough time is always haunting us. And I think in a virtual situation, it's a little bit more intensified. The other thing I wanted to do is, since we're teaching geography and we're doing science, I wanted the students to learn about climate change, which isn't really in the curriculum anywhere. So I thought that I could do that through grade 8 geography. And I thought it would be a good way to sort of look at how water affects climate change. So that was kind of where I was going, and kind of the idea of breaking down the silos that we're often feel that we're teaching in.
And Gigi, just before you get underway, could you put your slideshow into present so we can see the text a little better? Is that possible?
Sure, I'll do that. Sorry. I have to find my mouse. It's disappeared on me. Okay, is that better? It's loading up still.
I'm just waiting for it to, yes, so much better. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I may have to take it out of present here and there just to try to load in some other things, because otherwise it's really draggy, but hopefully that will work out. So we know that the way things are unfolding, that by 2050, it's projected that almost 70% of the world's population is going to be living in urbanized areas. And already we see that over half the world's population are living in urban settings. So for those of us who are visual people, this is where we're at 3-4 years ago now. And the thing to think about this is that in addition to having a very large urban population, there's just under 1 in 3 urban dwellers is living in a slum condition. And that's determined as not having sufficient access to clean water and sanitation. The other thing to think about in terms of globalization is the fact that many global or urban areas are situated on coastlines or other bodies of water, but we're going to first think about urban coastlines. So currently, about 10% of the world's population is living in an area that is a low-lying urban or low-lying coastal zone. And that's defined as being 10 meters or less above sea level. And about 2.5 billion people are living within 100 kilometers of the coast. So we have a huge amount of our population already situated close to the ocean. This is a graph that came out of the National Institute of Health, and they were predicting what urbanization would look like in 2030 and in 2060. Now, they had a couple of different scenarios that they were trying out for these prediction models. And those factors included economic situations that people would be experiencing and the kind of government structures that they would live in. So so if we look at 2000, the baseline year, there were about 600 million people living close to the water in low elevation coastal zones. In one scenario in 2030, they predicted that over 800 million people would be living in those areas. And in the other predictive set that they designed, it was almost a billion people. Looking out to 2060, in both scenarios, over 1 billion people are expected to be living in low-lying coastal areas. And in the second scenario that they have, it's almost 1.5 billion people. So huge number of people. And in terms of global patterns, most of those people are living in Asia. So we also know that water plays a huge role in climate change. And the next next slide I want to show you, and this is where I was hoping not to be in. Let's see if I can do this. I think I can do this. So this is a short video. And is this showing for people?
Not yet, but give it a second to come up. There, yeah, it's showing now.
So go back to present mode. The buttons worked well. It's always encouraging. Oh no. So, well, that video would suggest that these phenomena are not urban phenomena that we need to concern ourselves with. We know that Toronto has already been affected by climate change. And in fact, there was a study that came out a few years ago that suggested that in terms of cities, Toronto was going to be one of the cities that was going to be most heavily impacted by climate change. So this is an image from 2017 when we had really big flooding in Toronto. It was a year that the Toronto Islands were closed for quite a part of the summer, and a lot of businesses shut down. And then subsequently in 2018, in August, we had another big flood. This is an image taken from the Toronto Star at King and Dufferin Street, and it was quite dramatic. And the next I'm going to get out of that if I can. And this is from the Toronto Star. So this is a video that I'm not going to show you, but it's of two men who enter an elevator to go down and get their car. So they're in the elevator, unaware of what's going on. And as they're in the elevator, they realize that they're losing, that there's water coming in. And so if you read the text, they realize they're in a bit of a pickle. And one of them is on the handrail standing above it. The panel's jammed. And the water keeps going up. And the 991 call is dropped. They reach somebody who seems to be annoyingly calm. And then finally someone comes to help. So that's what's going on in Toronto. So, you know, we can't afford the arrogance that there's nothing going on here. So Toronto has got a flooding problem, and it's a combination of factors, old infrastructure and the climatic zone that we're in. And as recently as last year, there was another news article that happened because of unusually warm weather in what is supposed to be our winter. And again, there's flooding. So what is Toronto doing? So the next part of what we started talking about in class was some of the things that have been done that are happening to mitigate some of these consequences. So this is an image taken from University of Toronto Scarborough campus, where they built some bioswales. And bioswales are landscape architectural features that are slopes towards a drain. And the purpose of them is they slow both the volume and the rate of flow into the drains. And they also allow some of that water to infiltrate into the ground. And through the process of infiltration, the water is purified. So that's one innovative solution that's being done. Another one is a parking lot on Don Mills, where again, they're using bioswales. They're using different types of surfaces to try to decrease the heat island effect. And they're trying to make it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. There has been a number of efforts in terms of using green roofs that help cool the environment. They absorb a lot of the rainfall, and they decrease the water that goes into the storm drain systems, amongst some other effects that they have. And as well, some of those garden effects are being used in some newer condominiums downtown. And they're also being used at street level, where they're opening up spaces for different purposes. So kids playing, people being able to enjoy life before we all had to wear masks. And you know, this surface is designed to not create heat islands. It's got plants that are drought resistant, low maintenance, native pollinators, and so on. And so this leads us to the next part, which is what the kids did as their work. So this is based on a project that we did in the Environmental Education AQ Part 1 with Hillary. And it was rejigged a little bit because of teaching online. It wasn't something that we could go out to do as a group. And so what I asked the students to do instead was to take photographs of what they thought were solutions or maybe problems with respect to the urban water cycle. The class that I teach, they're spread out all over the city, unlike Adrienne's class that are very much in one area. So I thought that might give them some opportunity to show different things. And the goal that I was thinking of is, would there be disparities between assets in the city and areas that were maybe not quite as well appointed, if that's a good word, in terms of the structures that they might have to mitigate the effects of climate change. So what they were asked to do, these are the criteria they're asked to look at. They're asked to go out and take 10 photographs of images around where they lived, to create a little verse or poem about it, to have a Google map where they could put a pin, and then to write a description about what that that photograph was showing with respect to the urban water cycle. So this was a sample that they were given with the verse or the description, and then this is some of their student work. So this is what they came up as a class in terms of water problems and solutions in Toronto. And this was an unedited list. Some of them, you know, we might say as adults weren't as appropriate, but that's kind of where they're at. And this is an example of a water fountain. So this student has a poem and then a description of a water fountain. And what was interesting to me is that this person saw the water fountain as a surface for people as they're out and about. That was coordinates of where he had his images. Another student saw a water fountain not so much as a service, but more as a concern because of the bacteria and the germs and the algae that would be in it. So some really different takes in terms of how they interpret it, what they saw. There was a lot of repeats. Sinks, for example, came up in a lot of their photographs. And again, because of some of their situations, some of them could get out and about to take pictures, but some of them, you know, really had to stay home. One of the kids is in quarantine because his mother has got COVID. But the girl who wrote about the sinks was able to appreciate that there's different sources of water, groundwater or surface water, which is important in her understanding. Fire hydrants were seen again as an asset by most of them. And then this student saw a creek as being a good thing, but with the potential to flood, and therefore that could be problematic. And another student saw a creek as a habitat for animals. So kind of a different view of the same feature. One student connected things like fuels from boats, which is living in the city. We're not, most of us living right on the water, but we do contribute fuels into the water that then affects the quality of the watershed and the water cycle to us. And then the infrastructure of our pipes. So again, sometimes this is a plus and sometimes it's a minus. If it's broken, it's kind of a minus. And again, some of the students connected to how wastewater treatment has an effect on water quality and the water cycle. And rain barrels came out as well. And again, the location of rain barrels seems to be not uniformly distributed from what the kids were showing. So the last thing they needed to do was they needed to put all of these things on a Google map. So I'm just going to exit out of this, if it works, and go into the Google map. So this was an interactive map. And this, if we zoom out of it, kind of shows where they're choosing and where they're living. So some of them are living quite far west and some of them are living quite far east. So there's quite a variety of locations that they're in. If we pop this open, and I don't know if you can see it, I don't see it right now because of the, so anyway, now I can see it. So this was a downspout that somebody chose. And again, the recognition that a downspout, depending on where it's redirected, whether it's on grass or whether it's on a hard surface, can have an effect on whether or not it becomes a good thing or a bad thing, and recognizing as well that they can pick up contaminants. Another example was a pond that came up. So how is that affecting our environment and so on? So where are we going to go from here? So the next thing I'm hoping that we'll be doing is looking at the distribution of water in terms of social assets a little bit more critically. So where are those public fountains located? Where are washroom facilities? And then how does tree canopy affect the city? And particularly in the age of COVID, we know that access to washrooms have been problematic for people who are homeless, with places like Starbucks and coffee shops being closed, which were often where people would go, that with those places being closed, that you know, the privy is not, it's just not there. And that's a huge issue. And how do these assets, how are they related to, you know, to people's socioeconomic circumstances and to COVID? And then the last thing that we are hoping to do is to develop an app that will relate to the UN sustainability goals. So that's where we're going to take it, and hopefully it will all work out. So that's the end of my presentation. I just have to get this back up so I can stop sharing.
So we've got about 2 minutes left. We do have to end right at 4:20, but if anybody who's in the session today have some questions they would like to ask of our two presenters, we've got a minute or two. Gigi, were you sharing any resources with the group? Oh, there it is. Sorry. Okay.
I just posted the link to the reference. So I showed the chart, or part of the chart. I've just like posted the references that I collected as I was working on the research. So that's
yeah, most of the things I got out of I can post the ones that I used today. So like the article from the Star. My I was having problems earlier with
well, it's okay. I mean, it just if you happen to have something, that would be wonderful. But we just I just as somebody listening to you talking about the toilet one, I had to laugh because children would just anything to do with, you know, like toilet things will always engage the students. So that was a wonderful addition to your session, and I want to thank the two of you for your session today. It really brings in some real world examples of inquiry, and also you know, topics that are so relevant to the students, no matter where they live, but getting them to be thinking about those, you know, what the future is going to be like, and the role that they have to play in that as well. It's really important. So thank you so much on behalf of the Ecomp committee for sharing your activities and your resources, and providing lots of really good examples that teachers can use no matter what grade they're teaching, because that topic would certainly fit for everything. So thank you again, and hopefully everybody will have an opportunity to join us in 10 minutes for the closing session. So thank you for those who attended our session this afternoon, and thank you again to our two presenters.
Sorry to interrupt. I just realized the other link was